And welcome in to another installment of 15 Minutes with Andy. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is a time where we love to share stories of Northwest Ohio. The 15 minutes, if we ever land on 15 minutes, it'll be the first time, I think. The 15 minutes kind of comes from the 15 minutes of fame, that old cliche that we think all of our guests deserve to tell their story. And so that's where the title came from. We are trying to tell stories of hope and inspiration here in Northwest Ohio, and definitely positivity, because we really feel like there needs to be more of that in the world today that we live in. We are so happy to be joined in this particular podcast by Kimberly Wyse. Hi, Kimberly. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing good.
Thank you so much for taking time to be with us here today and share your story and your journey. I guess I'll let you maybe expand that introduction, if you would, a little bit to let our listeners know a little bit about you.
Well, thank you. I'd be happy to share. I am married to a farmer and we live currently out in rural Archbold. And I grew up in the area. I went to Stryker Elementary School and then eventually to Living Word Christian School for a few years. And then our family moved away to South Carolina. And I lived in the southern United States for a long time. And my now husband and I had a family connection. And so he had kind of always paid attention to what was happening in my life. And I had a blog, and he ended up getting connected with it and reading a few of my entries and decided to get in touch with me about 12 years ago now. And he went on Facebook and said, "Hey, remember me?" And I was like, yeah. How are your wife and kids? Because I couldn't imagine that he was still single. And he said, "I'm not married. I'm still single." And basically, that was it. He decided that he was going to come and get me.
Was your plan your family moves away? And
yes.
You're in the South, you're in South Carolina. Did you feel like you were going to be there for a long run? Was Northwest Ohio ever part of the plan again?
Northwest Ohio was completely out of my plans. I had actually moved after I graduated from college to Nashville, Tennessee, and I had lived there basically for about 13 years, except for when I went to graduate school. And I had every intention of living in Nashville for the rest of my life. And so when he approached me, I kind of laughed and thought, well, this is just, I was, kind of bored because I had just had big changes in my life. Like I had just lost my job and I had been seeing somebody and it hadn't worked out. And, here he was contacting me and I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. And I started talking to him and I realized like he was this great guy and he just seemed to get me. I was like, well, and I remember just really praying about it. And as we got to know each other better, laying it before the Lord and saying, what do I need to do here? And feeling like the Lord said, this is what I have for you. And I can do everything that I've called you to do from Ohio. You do not have to live in Nashville, Tennessee for me to use you in the ministry that I have felt called to be a part of. And so 17 months after he contacted me for the first time, we got married and I moved to Ohio, moved back.
Wow. And there was long distance thing going on for a while. Is that right?
There was. Our entire courtship basically was long distance, but my job situation had changed so that I had like these long weekends available all of a sudden, which I never would have had before because I worked at a church and I was always at church on the weekends. And all of a sudden, I didn't have that. And so I was able to spend a lot of time traveling back and forth. He would come. He's a farmer, so he could set his own hours a lot of the time. So we spent a lot of time back and forth with each other. And I realized that I felt really comfortable and at home here in this area. And I could do that.
You mentioned career-wise things had changed. You had done a few things while you were living in the South, right?
I did, yes. Let's see. I got a degree in English, and after I graduated from college, I moved to Nashville because I was a singer, and I loved books and writing and everything around that. And so if you know anything about Nashville, it's like the center of Christian publishing and then also Christian music, country music, all of that. And so I thought, what better place to live? So I was 22 years old. I had $63 in my pocket and I moved to Nashville. And
well, that's a leap.
It was. I remember thinking, well, worst case scenario, it doesn't work out. I move back home with mom and dad. I don't know. I'm going to try it. And it worked. I didn't become the singer that I thought I was going to be, like the next Amy Grant, but I built a nice life for myself there, that had been like my plan B. Okay, plan A is I'm going to, make this music career. Plan B is I'll build a nice life for myself. I'll find a good church. I'll make some friends. This will be a great place to live. And so that's what ended up happening. The one thing that didn't happen in all of that was the husband I was looking for. But after I got there, I worked for a Christian publishing house for about 6 years and really enjoyed that. But I had kind of hit a ceiling where I couldn't go any higher than what I had accomplished there without another degree. And I felt like God was really laying it on my heart that I needed to go to graduate school. And so I ended up going to seminary in Virginia Beach at Regent University and got a Master's of Arts in Practical Theology. And after that, I went back to Nashville and worked at my church that I'd gone to for the previous 6 years and was their women's minister.
Ministry, you're in that field, you said, of music and Christian music and this and that, so I guess it's not a huge leap, but when you were a younger girl and teenage years and all that, did you think that would ever be a calling, ever?
No, I sure didn't, because I did not see women in ministry in any official capacity because of just the way that I grew up. I don't think anybody ever told me I couldn't. I just didn't. Men were ministers. I thought I would be maybe a pastor's wife, and I was going to be fantastic and run things behind the scenes. But the idea of actually doing it myself, I really felt like I had to have like this moment with God where he said, this is what I want you to do. And I didn't understand it. I don't work in a church today. I feel like what I do is ministry, writing and speaking and the online stuff that I do. And I minister to my family, but that was not a job. That was not a career trajectory I saw myself in. I needed a job at that point, and the church offered me this job, and I was like, yes, I will do that.
So you're doing all of that, and this is when you meet your husband, and I'm sorry, is it Rick?
Rick, okay. Yes. So
and then that's when the courtship, and when did you think to yourself, this is, it took 17 months, you said,
yes.
That's till the marriage, but did you guys both know right away and kind of want to go make sure that it was right? Because failed relationships are very, very common for everybody.
They are. I was 34 years old when we met, and I had been praying for my husband and my future children all of my life, like from the time I was a little girl. That was one of my main goals in life. And so the fact that I was 34 years old and still not married was really hard on me. Like, I was very sad about that and frustrated. And so, I was giving everything I had to this ministry that I was doing at the church. I was there 4 and 5 nights a week, teaching Bible studies or leading groups and working with women and hoping to find, the husband that I felt like God had for me, and it wasn't happening. And then the church it was 2008 hit, and the church had this terrible economic downturn that hit the church. And it was a very large church, and there were a lot of people on staff. And so they ended up downsizing and laying off 25% of their staff. And I was one of the last ones hired. So I'd been there for 4 years, but I lost my job because they couldn't continue to pay the salaries for everyone that they had on staff. And that was really hard on me because here I thought that I had followed after everything God had called me to do and had made a lot of sacrifices to be in that position. And my job was gone. And so I ended up working as a nanny for one of my friends who had 5 kids because I sent out hundreds of job applications and resumes and didn't get called for anything. And I had a good resume, But it just, I felt like at that time, I felt like this just isn't what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not supposed to continue looking for a ministry job right now. There's something else that I'm supposed to be doing. And during that time was when Rick contacted me. So when I say my whole situation had changed, I mean, everything had changed. And if it hadn't changed, I don't know how open I would have been to leaving Nashville. The timing really worked out well.
So you come back to Northwest Ohio.
Yes.
You're now married. Obviously now family is going to, but I guess before we dive into that,
yes.
What was you're here in Northwest Ohio and you leave for a while, and now, I mean, Nashville's a major city, and coming back to Northwest Ohio,
yes.
and it's not a major city. What was that like for you?
Yes. Not only was it not a major city, I had been living very close to downtown when I moved from Nashville back to Northwest Ohio. I moved onto a rural farm, and it was major culture shock. I remember at the time, like the Red Box, video rental things were very popular. And so it had been nothing for me to stop on my way home from work and pick up a Red Box and watch a video and take it back the next day. And I got to Nashville and I was like, I got to Northwest Ohio, and I'm like, how do you rent a movie? Like, what do you even do? And, Walmart was like 15 minutes away, and there was one there, but then I would have to drive 15 minutes back the next day to return it. It was just, that was just one of the funny ones. But yeah, like I would hear gunshots outside my house and like be freaking out what's happening out there. And it was just my neighbors shooting target practice on a Sunday afternoon. There was nothing to be afraid of. Like nobody locks their doors of their cars and leaves their keys in the cars. I mean, just completely different than anything that I was used to, even though I had lived here as a child.
But happy?
Yes, very happy. I always wanted to be a writer and just didn't have time to do it because I was working so much. And so here I was in the middle of, farmland, fields, and my husband set up a room for me in the back of our house that had windows on 3 sides. And I would sit back there at my desk with my computer and look out on all this wide open farm country. And it was now my job to be a writer. Like I didn't have to go to work. I could take my time and drink my coffee in the morning. And, it was really sweet those first few months before I got pregnant with our first child.
I was just going to say, and then because you had said earlier in our discussion that was always the goal. So
yes.
Family started fairly quickly.
Yes, and Rick and I had agreed very early on when we started dating that we were old enough that we didn't really want to waste our time if we didn't feel like this was something that was even a possibility for us. So we had talked about it very early on, like, okay, we're not there yet, but let's just talk about if we got there, what would we want to do? And we both agreed that we'd traveled and we'd worked and we'd done all these things. We really wanted to have children, both of us. And he's actually 11 years older than me. So, this was a huge change for him as well when we got married. And we just agreed, like, this is top priority. So we'd been married for 4 months when I found out we were expecting our first child. And we were just thrilled. Until I started throwing up.
That doesn't make it quite thrilling. Isn't the word when you're doing that, right?
No, it wasn't. I found out that my body responds to pregnancy with something called Hyperemesis Gravidarum, which is extreme pregnancy sickness. And so we had 4 wonderful months, and then I got really, really sick. Like, it's hard to describe. Most people think, morning sickness, oh, you big baby. This was different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you didn't stop at 1.
No. After a very, very miserable, difficult pregnancy, where I was actually on bed rest towards the end and everything, I finally had this beautiful newborn baby. And it was like the funniest thing to me was like, I wanted the epidural. I wanted all of the like painkillers because my pregnancy had been so terrible. Like I was like, let's let childbirth be good. But of course the epidural didn't take. So nothing about this was easy. And I was not prepared for the pain of childbirth. And so here she was finally born, and they put her in my lap, and I looked at her, and I just never felt anything like that. I knew all about babies. I'd been a nanny. I'd taken care of kids. I had younger siblings, but nothing prepared me for the love that just rushed in. She did nothing to deserve it. All she did was exist. There was nothing, there was no reason. It wasn't, she just existed. And here she was, the most amazing creation on the planet. Mm-hmm. And I looked at my husband and I said, let's do it again. And his eyes got really big and he stepped back and he was like, okay, but like,
can we enjoy this one?
Yeah, maybe like not quite yet. And so, we 5.5 months later, I was expecting again, and that was another very, very difficult pregnancy. This time with a baby, and so I had within the first 20 months of our marriage, we had 2 babies. But now you're pros at it. Yeah. I mean, we were thrilled. We were like exhausted and completely shocked and out of our element and unsure what to do with ourselves, and so incredibly happy and delighted. So my second child was a boy. His name is Charlie. And so 15 months apart, and I am just supposed to be on cloud 9 because I finally have my 2 babies, and it was a little rough there. So we got a little bit of help because we were old enough mm-hmm. and tired enough that we felt like it was probably a good idea. And because of the wonderful helper that we found, I made it through those first really rough years with 2 babies and kept my sanity, which was, I don't know, might have been threatened had I not had a little bit of assistance there.
Well, 2 babies are a bundle.
Yes.
But that wasn't the end of the story.
No.
And number 3 is the big curveball in all of this
yes.
that God sent your way, right? Tell
yes.
us about baby 3.
Well, I like to say that babies 1 and 2 were our miracle babies, like our everyday miracles. They were just the fact of how old we were and how long we'd waited. They were just absolute miracles. But after things started to slow down a little bit and they became a little more independent, we looked at each other one day and we're like, we don't know what to do with calm and peace. Like, let's have another baby. And what's the age difference between the 1 and 2 and now 2 to 3? Okay, so 1 and 2 are 15 and a half months apart.
Okay.
Then the third one came along right before Charlie turned 3. So he was not quite 3 and Eliana was 4.
Okay.
And so they were a little more independent. They were talking, they were out of diapers. And so it's really seemed like good timing. But I was 41 and it was another really very difficult pregnancy. And this time we were hearing from the doctors that there were some concerns. Things just weren't quite right in the tests. And I didn't have like the blood work or the amniocentesis or anything because I thought, why bother? I mean, this is our child. We're going to love this child no matter what. And so we had a lot of ultrasounds and a lot of tests. And there was always just like this, something's not quite right. But I'd actually been told that with the first 2 on a number of occasions and everything was perfect. And so I had an early feeling that something was a little off and had actually just gotten very upset about it. And even, I hate even repeating this now, but the truth was at that time, I had even told the Lord, if there's something wrong with this baby, I need you to take it now. Like, I can't be a special needs mom. I can't do this. Don't ask it of me. If this needs to be a miscarriage, then I'll be content. I'll be happy with where we are now. I'll never ask for another thing again. And God really met me during that time. And I think with great compassion, because that's who God is, saw my heart. And he met me there and he said, no, you will not lose this child. This child will bring life and health, joy and peace. And so having that confirmation in my heart, I moved forward with the pregnancy and heard all of the things that the doctor said that they, had a little concerns here and there and thought he's going to be fine. Life and health, joy and peace. But he wasn't fine. He was born 2 weeks early, so it was about 38 weeks, and it was an emergency C-section because he had stopped moving inside of me. And if he was born here in Bryan, and as soon as he was born, they said he's very, very sick and we have to help him right now. And so they took him away before I even had a chance to look at him. And so I was laying on the operating table, and I write a lot about that in my book. Like, if you are a birth story junkie, this is the book for you, because I write about it. And it was traumatic. There was a lot that went into it.
I can't imagine.
Yeah. And that one is a little hard for me to talk about. Just, it's, some people don't like to hear it anyway. It's, a lot of stuff that goes on with birth, But they took him away from me. And I remember looking at my husband and saying, you go with him right now. You go with him and you let him hear your voice. He's just taken away from the only comfort he's ever known. He's just ripped out of me and gone. And I don't want him to be traumatized for the rest of his life because of this. You go with him and you talk to him. Like, hold his foot, something, but let him hear your voice because he knows your voice. And so he did that. He went with him. And I was, they took care of me, got me back to my room. But I had like some kind of, I'm not sure if it was an anxiety attack or something, but I actually had like a little seizure. And it could have been like just everything that was happening at the time. I was not responding well. And so they gave me some medication that put me right to sleep. So he comes back in the room to check on me, and I'm like, what are you doing? Don't wake me up. Go be with the baby. And he was like, well, I just wanted to check on you. Are you okay? And I'm like, yes, just go be with him. And so he was with the baby, and I had a friend who was a nurse who was there that day. Thank God for her. And she came in and she said, Kimberly, there's something that I need to tell you. And actually, let me back up a little bit. She had brought me pictures of him. She'd taken my phone and she'd gone and taken pictures of him, and she brought them back to me. And I remember thinking, like, okay, newborn babies are not often cute. And reminding myself of that, like, my parents always tell me I was not a cute newborn. Like, don't expect your newborn to be cute. But it was like, there was a picture of him where like his whole body was splayed open and his mouth was open and his tongue was hanging out to the side. And I just thought, what in the world? But I was very sleepy. I looked at the pictures and I thought, I'm not sending those to anybody, because my parents wanted a picture, and they would text us pictures. And I was like, nah. And I went back to sleep, and she came in a little bit later and she said, I want to warn you of something. It looks like Redmond, which was what we had named him, Redmond, might have Down syndrome. And, I kind of woke up a little bit enough to look at her, and I was like, well, no, he doesn't. Because I'm thinking life and health, joy and peace. Mm-hmm. That does not equate with Down syndrome in my mind. And she was like, well, and she kind of went through some of the physical characteristics of Down syndrome. And she said, Redmond has quite a few of those. And that is what they think it might be. So they're going to come and talk to you about that. I just wanted to warn you. And I was like, yeah, he's just puffy because of his birth. And I went back to sleep. They ended up taking him to the Toledo Hospital NICU that morning, or afternoon, I guess. And they were taking him lights and sirens. Like, they weren't going to let me see him. And she actually came in and got my bed and wheeled me out into the hallway and blocked the door before they could take him. And she opened the sides of the little incubator thing that he was in. And she said, I want you to look in. I want you to see him. I want you to touch him. And I knew when she did that she thought that might be the only time I ever got to see him alive. And so I did that, but I really couldn't even see anything about him. He had all this tape on his face and a ventilator, and I could just basically see the side of a baby. And we didn't know what to do. Do we go to what do we do? Yeah. And they said, Rick should stay at the hospital with you. There's nothing you can do he can do in the NICU. He should stay with you, get a good night's rest, and you can go tomorrow. And I had just had this major surgery, and 23 hours later, I was at the Toledo NICU looking at my son for the first time. And, you know, when I looked at him, I saw a beautiful little boy. I didn't know what babies with Down syndrome looked like. He had his eyes closed. He had a ventilator, you know, I didn't know what I was looking for. And I thought, he doesn't have Down syndrome. He's fine. And the doctor came in and talked to us and said, that's what we think is going on here, but we won't know until we get the genetic testing back. And that'll take about 2 weeks, but we're going to treat him like he does.
Was it touch and go then?
It was very touch and go. They told us at that point he was the sickest baby in the NICU. And I didn't understand. Like, it's still hard for me to remember exactly what they said to me at that time. I know what the diagnosis was, but they were having a very hard time stabilizing him. His blood sugar was going up and down. He had holes in his heart. His breathing, his lungs weren't working correctly. They had him on something called nitric oxide at the highest level they could have it on, and they couldn't put it any higher because it could damage his lungs. And so, you know, I'm in this NICU room, and there's all these screens and numbers and everything's beeping, and people are coming in and out, and it's dark in there, and I'm being told he's the sickest baby we have here. You know, and I'm looking down and I'm just seeing this beautiful little boy that I just want to hold, and I can't hold him. And it was really hard. It was completely shocking on so many levels. And you know, Rick was right there with me, and we had our pastor come, and we had family members coming, and we spent 3 days in Toledo not knowing what was going to happen the next minute. We stayed at the Ronald McDonald House, and they took the best care of him they possibly could, but they kept telling us, we think we might need to send him up to the University of Michigan to Ann Arbor for something called ECMO. And hopefully not, but we might need to. And those were...
I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, a pendulum of emotions.
Yes.
Angry and frustrated, hopeful, though, still at the same time, and loving your child. I'm a dad myself. I just can't imagine what you guys went through.
Yeah. And for me, because I had started praying for my children when I was 11 years old, I had believed with all of my heart, this 11-year-old, you know, like this cemented in my mind when I was so young, that if you pray and you ask God for good things, like, that's the formula. You get good things. And, you know, I wasn't perfect. I was far from perfect, but I was trying really hard. And in my worldview, my Christian view, that meant that I should be spared from hard things, that there was no way that I was going to have a child with a birth defect or a disability or, you know, anything like that. Like, okay, maybe he'll have to stay in the NICU for 3 days, but we're taking him home and he's going to be fine, and God's going to work a miracle, and this is not going to be Down syndrome, and you all are wrong. You know, and then I would have these moments of like, are you crazy? Like, all these doctors are telling you this. Mm-hmm. Like, don't be dumb. I mean, I don't, you know, just like this horrible swing of emotions. And then, like, did I do this to him? You know, because I knew at our ages that we were told repeatedly that there's a higher risk for birth defects the older you get. And now that I know more about Down syndrome, I know that more babies with Down syndrome are born to younger mothers than they are to older mothers, but that there is an increased chance as you get older. And I was 41. And so, you know, just this shame that I felt, and this, I was really being hard on myself. Like, you did this to him. You weren't satisfied. You weren't content. And now look what your life is ruined. If this is true, if he does have Down syndrome, I mean, this is just the pendulum of emotions that I'm going through. You know, you've ruined your life. You've ruined your children's lives. You've taken away every bit of peace you'll ever have for the rest of your life. And just at one point, I remember kind of just standing there, almost like just scared to even take a step forward, because I'm just staring at this door that was in front of me, like, oh boy, and knowing, you know, my mind was really out of control at that moment. And at that moment, a social worker walked up to me and said, "Can I talk to you for a few minutes?" And I was like, yeah. And she was like, "How are you doing?" And, nobody had asked me that. And I lost it. I just started crying. We go into her office. She goes and gets Rick, and I tell her, what I'm going through, what I'm thinking. And she's like, "But wait a second. Like, did you know ahead of time that he was going to have Down syndrome?" And I'm like, "No." She said, "Why didn't you know? There's tests for these things now." And I said, "Well, I didn't get tested because I believed we would love whatever child God gave us." And as I said it, she looked at me like, "Hello?" And I was like, "Oh my word, I said I would love whatever child God gave me. This is the child God gave me." And she was like, "Yes, and you knew the risks and you believed that life was worth it, even if it was not the quote perfect child that you thought you deserved or would get or whatever." And I was like, "You're right, I did. Mm. And it just calmed me. It just settled everything very quickly. And then there were still emotional swings in the weeks to come, in the months to come.
I was just going to say, take us through this journey now.
Yes.
And how things progressed.
So it was a Friday night, and we had been with Redmond all day in the NICU at Toledo, and the doctor had told us, "Hey, we think he's doing really well, and if he makes it through the night, we think that, this is the upswing and he's going to be just fine." And so we went to bed that night thinking, okay, maybe we'll get to take him home tomorrow. We had no clue what our life was about to become. And we woke up the next morning and the phone was ringing very early. And I answered, and it was the doctor at the NICU saying, "We have to take him to Ann Arbor to be on ECMO now. Get up, come over here and sign papers immediately. He is very sick." And so just another complete shock. So we're scrambling to get up and, get over to the hospital, which was very close, but they went up there and they've got him, they've got this travel crib right beside him, and they've got transport teams, and they're unhooking him, and they're saying, "You got to sign these papers. We have to send him to Ann Arbor right now." This is they are terrified. I can see the looks on their faces, and they are terrified. And we were just like, "Okay, well, fine, we'll go to Ann Arbor, but he's not going to need ECMO. No way." So we had just been told he was okay. Mm-hmm. We signed the papers. We can't go in the ambulance with him. They won't let us. And they take off. And so we have to go back to the Ronald McDonald House and pack all of our stuff up and get up to Ann Arbor. And we somehow beat the ambulance to Ann Arbor. So we get there and they start, they came to talk to us, and there's a parent advocate in the NICU there. And she's like, "I've never had this happen before. I'm not sure how you all beat the ambulance, but he's not here yet." Well, we didn't know it until a year later, but he had died 3 times in the ambulance on the way to Ann Arbor. Wow. And the reason that we beat them is because they kept having to pull over to resuscitate him because they needed the driver to help them. We were so clueless as to how bad the situation was. And it wasn't their lack of telling us. It was just our inability to absorb it at the time, because I think we were just in so much shock. Yeah. So he arrives and there's all kinds of, activity in his room. And I'm thinking about ER, the TV show, mm-hmm. or any of those doctor shows, and watching this play out. And I'm seeing the nurse up on his bed, squeezing this bag. And I'm thinking, she's bagging him. Oh my word. I didn't even know what that meant, but I knew that wasn't good. And I'm standing there freaking out. What's happening? Is he okay? And the nurse just looked up at me and kind of snapped and said, "We're just getting to know him." And I was like, okay. And so I realized we probably didn't need to be in there. So we took off. We went out into the hallway and let them do their work. And, at that point I realized I hadn't eaten anything all day. It was, well after lunchtime at this point. So somebody brought me some food. I ate something. They're still getting to know him in the room, and there was nothing I could do. And I had just had surgery. So they're just my family, my sister had come. And she's like, just go lay down. They had a
Take
place
care
to
of
lay
you.
down. Go, yeah, we'll stay here with him. There's nothing you can do right now. So I went to this parent room and laid down and hadn't been laying down for more than 5 minutes. And there was just a knock on the door, urgent knock on the door. And it was my sister, and she has the wheelchair, and she's like, you've got to get back right now. They're putting him on ECMO.
Which for our listeners is?
Yes. So I had no idea, except that it was serious. So it's I can't even pronounce it. I'm not sure. Extracorporeal membrane oxygenation.
Okay.
So if you're a nurse or a medical person, please do not judge me for my pronunciation. But ECMO is the abbreviation, and is a last resort life support system where they cut a slit into the base of your neck, like by your collarbone, and they put 2 large tubes called cannulas down into your heart, and they pump the blood out of your heart into this machine where they oxygenate it artificially, which is what your lungs are supposed to be doing and aren't doing. And then the other tube pumps the oxygenated blood back into the body. So Redmond, tiny little baby, had 2 giant tubes in his neck going down into his heart. And we had to sign papers before this saying basically this will save his life if possible, but it could also kill him or make his quality of life very bad. Like just lists and lists and lists of all the things that could go wrong. And, Rick and I just looked at each other and we were like, what are we going to do? I mean, we have to try anything. Mm-hmm. And so, we signed the papers knowing not only do we think he has Down syndrome, but now he might have all kinds of other problems just from the treatment to try to keep him alive. And they had told us the surgery is going to take about 15 minutes. Well, they were in there for 45 minutes. And finally, the nurse comes out and says to us, or maybe it was the doctor. You know what? It was the surgeon. And I describe her in my book. That's kind of a funny point in the book because she had a tail and everything. It was weird. It's like the technology used to actually do the surgery, required her to have a Halloween costume on basically. And in my attention, I kind of giggled about it. She was not amused. It's like, what in the world? And she comes out and she's like, okay, I've gotten the tubes in, but they're what we call positional. There's something blocking them. They're not all the way in where they're supposed to be, but I've got them in the best I can. And we may have to redo the surgery if it doesn't work. And I'm like, okay, you're in his body and there's a blockage and you don't know what it is. And she was like, right. And so my understanding of medicine from all the, medical dramas I'd watched was not in any way able to prepare me for what actually took place. How do you not know? You have x-rays, you have all these things. They didn't know. So he's on this life support. He's in a medically induced coma. So he's laying on this bed and he can't, his chest isn't rising and falling because he's not breathing on his own. And he's swollen and he's, because he has Down syndrome, he has low muscle tone. So he's just kind of splayed out, where newborn babies are typically in the fetal position. You think of them all curled up. Well, he was the opposite. He was out. And so it was very surreal for us. Is he alive? What is this? And every time they had to do his care, every 4 hours, they would have to change his diaper and, check him over for brain bleeds and stuff. It was terrifying. Every time they would do that every 4 hours and they had to move his body, these tubes, these cannulas would get out of position and then alarms would just start going off right and left. And everybody would rush in and there'd be all these doctors and people working on him. And so Rick and I would go back out in the hall and we would just pray that God would help them do whatever they were doing. And that went on for 3 or 4 days that it was like that. Wow. Yes.
I mean, and you thought you had, by having 2 children, those were your miracles.
Right.
Yeah, and here you're witnessing one, or at least trying to be one.
Yes.
When did you get finally some kind of definitive news for you guys and everything that you and your husband and entire family are going through? How long?
It was a full 2 weeks before we found out for sure that he had Down syndrome. And about day 4 of him being on ECMO, he developed something called a tension pneumothorax, which was an air pocket beside his lung, and it was messing everything up with ECMO. And so they told us that they were going to either have to do a chest tube to release the air, or he would die because ECMO wouldn't be able to work. But if they did the chest tube, he would die from internal and external bleeding because he was on blood thinners for ECMO. So it was like a no-win situation. And so I always like to talk about this point in the story, because I was numb. Like, I couldn't pray. I couldn't, like, I had these thoughts going through my head, like, just, they didn't make sense. But at that point, I couldn't believe that God might save his life, because, I prayed for all these years, and now he had Down syndrome. Like, nothing, my whole world was on its end, upside down. And so that day, I remember I put it out on social media, like, we have an emergency. We need people to pray. And we got responses from people all over the world to that prayer request. And they gave us until 2:00 that afternoon for something to happen. They didn't know what. They were just going to wait till 2:00. And then at 2:00, if there was no change, they were going to do the chest tube. And we knew, he would bleed and it wouldn't stop. And at 2:00, they came in and they redid the x-ray. And they're just all standing around the x-ray machine, talking, like looking at things. And I was going nuts. So I snuck up behind them and looked over their shoulders at the machine. And what I saw was a perfectly normal chest x-ray. They had shown me the x-ray before. Everything was off. And I'm no radiologist, so I don't know for sure, but it looks okay. So I snuck back over to my family and my pastors, and we're all waiting. And the nurse finally comes over to us and says, well, I've been a nurse for 21 years and I've never seen anything like this, but the tension pneumothorax has gone away. Wow. Everything is lined back up again. He is fine. There is no reason we need to do a chest tube. And she said, tension pneumothoraxes do not go away on their own, ever. This is a miracle. And she had tears in her eyes. And I knew in that place that we were at the University of Michigan, it's very science, technology. This is not a God place. This is not a place where people give credit to God. This is a place where people give credit to science and technology. And science and technology were certainly at work. But there was no scientific explanation for this. And she had tears in her eyes, and she was like, this is a miracle. There is no other way to say it. This is a miracle. And from that day forward, they could do all of their care for him every 4 hours, and the alarms weren't going off. He was suddenly like a different baby. And after he'd been on ECMO for 6 days, he came off ECMO. And that he was still on the ventilator until he was about 14 days old. At about 14 days old, he came off the ventilator, and we did find out for sure that he had complete trisomy 21, which is like the typical form of Down syndrome. It's present at conception. There was nothing that I could do to prevent it. There was nothing that I did to make it happen.
That had to help you and your husband out immensely, at least to get that verification, right?
It did. And just to know, okay, this is what it is. And we had a doctor come and say to us, listen, this is not the end of the world. People with Down syndrome are delightful people. And what you're going to do after you get through this medical crisis is you're going to go home and you're going to raise your baby. And he's going to be a sibling to your older children. And they're going to love him. And he's going to go to school with them, just the same school that they go to. And he's going to go to prom. And he's going to have a job. And if he wants to go to college, he can go to college. If he wants to have a career, he can have a career. People with Down syndrome are getting married and having babies and starting businesses. This is the best time in history for you to have this child. And you two are uniquely prepared for him.
Was that the right person delivering the right message at the right time?
I mean, it was just, I didn't, Rick and I are old enough that we didn't grow up with inclusiveness. We didn't know people who had any really kind of disabilities. I mean, Rick actually will tell you he had a little bit more of experience with it than I did because he had a family member who had like some intellectual disabilities. But I had nothing. I had no context for this whatsoever. And so for that doctor to say that to us, it opened up my heart to hope, to where I could begin to look into Down syndrome and see like, okay, what are we dealing with here? And to realize, oh, I have a baby boy.
That's exactly right.
And he is going to be a part of our family, and we are going to love him, and this is going to be okay.
How old is Redmond now?
He is 4.5 years old. He turned 4.5 on October 1st. So he's 4.5 years old, and he is the fanciest miracle I know, because this child has put us through it. Let me tell you, like, he was in the NICU for 34 days, and then he came home on oxygen and a feeding tube. And I write about that in my book too. That was a really hard journey just to get through all of that. He had a lot of upper respiratory infections and issues those first few years, but God has directed our steps and shown us how to take care of him, and brought us to the right doctors and the right people who know about people with Down syndrome and what they need. And so we actually do something called biohacking with him. We give him a lot of supplements, and it's working. He is not on any prescription medications at all at this point in his life. They told us that he had a huge hole in his heart. He would absolutely have to have open heart surgery when he was 4 to 6 months old. That hole there were 3 holes. There's only 1 hole left, and it's so tiny that he can live with it for the rest of his life without any trouble or difficulty. He's never had to have open heart surgery. He had hearing aids for a little while because they said he had moderate hearing loss. And one day, earlier this year, we went in for a regular hearing test to check the levels on his hearing aids, and they took a really long time to do the test and finally came back and said, we're not sure what's going on, but it doesn't look like he has any hearing loss anymore. And I was like, what? I hadn't even prayed for him to be, like, I'd prayed for him to be healthy, but I'd never prayed for God to take care of his hearing loss. And we've had his hearing tested 3 times since then. He has perfect hearing. It's
miracle after miracle.
It is. I mean, and he has a perfect lung x-ray. If you look at his chest x-ray of his lungs, they had told us at the beginning he'll never have a pretty chest x-ray. The initial damage from the ventilator and ECMO and all of that stuff, he'll always have damaged lungs. He has a perfect chest x-ray. His lungs are perfectly healthy. He had reactive airways for a while, which is like baby asthma, and he was on breathing treatments every 4 hours, and then all kinds of medical interventions for baby asthma. He is completely off of all of his asthma medications. And we still take precautions because we don't want him to get sick, but he has no indications of asthma or any kind of breathing trouble whatsoever. He is just one thing after the next, miracle after miracle after miracle.
Personality-wise, how would you describe that? Life
and health, joy and peace. That is what I would describe. This child is delightful. He's funny. He has a great sense of humor. His laugh, when he giggles, everybody stops to laugh. We had a social worker stop by yesterday because we still have ongoing things that we do for him. And he met her at the door. He'd never met her before. He met her at the door, took her by the hand, led her into the house, told her where to sit on the couch, and then started to crawl up on the couch next to her, and then stopped and said, "Wait, book!" And he ran over to the bookshelf and grabbed a book and brought it over and handed it to her. Book, read. You read. He wanted, and she read him a book. He just sat there and cuddled with her. And she asked me, she's looking at me like she's wearing a mask, and she's used to people being concerned about the germs when they come, especially somebody with Redmond who has apparently, supposedly a weakened immune system. And I'm saying, it's fine. He's fine. He actually probably had COVID earlier this spring, and he had a runny nose for 2 or 3 days. This child is so healthy. We don't have to worry about him anymore. He is, he has delays. Of course he has delays. And God has taught us so much through that. What is our definition of success? What is our definition of quality of life? Is it somebody who is the smartest kid in the room? Is it somebody who can do everything, weeks ahead of their developmental schedule or months or whatever? Is it all those things we thought were important? When my first two were little, like I wanted them dressed to perfection. I wanted their hair done. I wanted them to be the cutest, smartest, most athletic, most pleasant children anybody ever met. And I was going to make that happen because I'm, a little bit of a control freak. And having Redmond has opened our eyes to what is really important. And I mean, they're cute kids. They're all three cute.
I was going to say, how's that sibling relationship?
Man. And they love each other. They love each other. My oldest daughter is 8.5 now. And her greatest joy right now, she's such a nurturer, is to take care of Redmond at bedtime. Like, it's my job to give him a bath, get him ready for bed, and put him to bed. But she doesn't want me to do it. She wants to do it. And I mean, she will go to great efforts just to take care of him and then have him sleep next to her in her bed. And they just cuddle up together. He has his own bed. Like, he needs to be in his own bed, but she wants him with her. And so after they fall asleep, we go in and get him and put him in his own bed. And, his older brother is just so good with him. He helps him out and takes care of him. And you see him, like, they're brothers. They still fight, they still get annoyed with each other. And when, Charlie has a friend around, he doesn't always want Redmond tagging along, just like any other big brother would be.
Yep.
But having Redmond as his brother has brought a level of compassion to Charlie that I don't know. I mean, I don't know what he would have been like without Redmond, but I don't know that most kids have. There's a resilience that they've come to know because they've had to be very patient while we take care of their brother, and they've had to do without us some, and God's taught us a lot through that too. Who takes care of our children? Who is ultimately responsible for them? They're God's gift to us. They're not ours. And we do the best we can. And God fills in the blanks. God takes care of those places where we can't be. And even if they grow up and they have some resentment, like, that is God's thing to take care of. I've had issues related to my childhood or even, Redmond's birth and things like that happened. And God's brought people along to take care of me and to help me get through them so that I can sit here and talk about these things without becoming so upset that I can't carry on. I can talk about it, even though it was very difficult. I look back on it now and I remember that it happened. I know it was awful, but it doesn't prevent me from living my life and sharing this testimony, because God's brought people to help me, just like he will for my kids if there's things that they're going through as a result. But they're gaining so much from their relationship with their brother. And he's fun. He's exciting. Like, he loves nothing more than our Friday night pizza night. So we blow up an air mattress in the living room, and like, he cheers so hard when he knows we're going to get the pizza and we're blowing up the air mattress, and he lets us know he's going to be right in the middle of it. Like, he's not sleeping in his bed. He's sleeping with them.
That's awesome.
So he's just a part of our family. He's in preschool. He rides a horse every week. In something called hippotherapy, which is so fun. He goes to Sunday school at church. And he loves it. He's talking, he's walking and running and jumping, and he has friends at school. We go out in the community and people walk up to us and they're like, Redmond, hey! And he can't tell me the names of his friends at school yet, but they come up and introduce themselves to us. Hey, I'm so-and-so, and I'm Redmond's friend at school. And he loves to play rock, paper, scissors. And he starts to like play rock, paper, scissors with his friends from school. And I want to explain to them what he's doing. And they're like, we know, and they're letting him win every time because they know he's going to choose paper every single time. So, they're going to choose rock every single time and just let him win. Yeah. It's different. That doctor was right. It's different these days.
So you've mentioned a book, so I want you to talk about the book by title if you want. You also blog, you speak. I mean, did you want to do this right away after, or is this something that gradually, how did this all come about?
That's a great question. I have always felt comfortable with a microphone in my hands, like my parents
You're a natural today, by the way.
Thank you. My parents jokingly gave me a turkey baster when I was younger because that was my Jesus stick, I think, or my preaching stick, I called it. My dad's a pastor. And back then, they had like the old-fashioned microphones that he would hold while he preached. And I would, pretend to be preaching and speaking. It's just a little child with the turkey baster. And so it's something that I've always enjoyed. And when I was in women's ministry, I had a lot of opportunities to speak and teach and do those kind of things. And I loved it. Well, even my job before that, I had a lot of chances to do that. So I find that when I'm going through things and I feel like God's teaching me things, I have to have a way to get it out and teach it to others. So if I'm not having opportunities to speak, then I'm blogging about it, or I'm putting it up on my social media, or I'm telling my friends and they're annoyed, okay, that's enough. Find someplace else to teach this. So I started this blog back in 2008 because I was a women's minister at the time. And the church said, hey, this will be another opportunity for ministry. Like, teach some stuff on your blog. And it's developed over time. It's changed. But it's KimberlyWyse.com, and Wyse is W-Y-S-E. So I just tried to make the title as simple as possible because I'm not good at naming things. So it's just my name. And then I'm very active on Facebook and Instagram. And they're both, like, Facebook I think is Kimberly Wyse and Instagram is Kimberly.Wyse. And I just love to post pictures of my family and show people that you don't have to be afraid, like I was, of a diagnosis that you don't understand or that is, different than what you had in mind. And the thing that God told me, the life and health, joy and peace, in my mind that wasn't compatible with any trouble or any challenges in life. I thought that meant that my life would be like smooth, and that's not life. That's not who God created us to be. If you read the Bible, you read story after story after story of characters who struggled and had difficulties and weren't healed miraculously from every single thing that happened to them. And God has healed Redmond on so many levels from so many things, but he still has Down syndrome. He still has those delays and some of those, challenges, and that's not going away. We're going to take care of him the best we can. We're going to give him every opportunity to succeed, but we're going to love him right where he is. And so my social media stuff is spiritual encouragement. It's encouragement for Christians, for women, but it's also showing what a life can be like that didn't turn out the way that you told God it ought to be. And that God's still in that, and God understands, even in that time where I couldn't pray. He met me there. He was there every step of the way, even when I didn't feel him. That was my heart that was closed. It wasn't him far away from me. He was right there. And during a time where I couldn't quote scripture and I couldn't pray, I could sing. And so that's what I did. I sung my way through that thing. And I never once told any of the staff at the University of Michigan that I was a Christian. And that last week we were there was a constant parade of workers sneaking into our room and whispering to me, we're Christians too. And we've been watching Redmond, and he is a miracle. And there's no explanation for this other than God. And we've been praying for him. And I'm looking at them like, how do you even know I'm a Christian? I was so afraid to ruin my witness for God because I was so shocked and hurt and upset that I never even told anybody. And they're like, oh, we hear you singing. And I didn't even realize I was singing loud enough for anybody to hear me. I was just holding him and singing to him while I rocked him. And they walked by and they heard it and they recognized the songs and they knew that we were Christians. And the only thing I did in that whole room was to put on the one wall, "For this child I have prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made of him." That was the only scripture that I put. It's from 1 Samuel, and Redmond's name is Redmond Samuel Wyse, and it means my God has answered with a wise protector. And we don't know what Redmond's going to protect us from, but we believe that God gave us that name for him.
And why, you know what? I'm listening to you too. Why can't, and you mentioned this too, crediting science. Why can't it be both?
It is both. Absolutely.
Science, faith, marriage.
Yes. And whether the man who created ECMO or not was a Christian, I have no doubt that God knew that there would be a Redmond Samuel Wyse who needed that, and everybody else who's ever needed that. And he gave that wisdom to that person who created it. By the way, he worked at the University of Michigan. Like, we were in the best possible place for Redmond to be on ECMO. And we definitely credit science and technology for his life. But we know who's the creator of science and technology, and is absolutely the Lord. And he worked supernatural miracles right alongside of the science and the awesome things that saved his life. And we're so thankful he wasn't born 30 or 40 years ago before any of that was possible. When we know the things that even the supplements that we use now, they've been understood because of the Human Genome Project over the last 30 years, that they've been studying people with Down syndrome, and they do this biohacking thing where they can help regulate their levels, because people with Down syndrome have upregulated and downregulated in their systems. I can't ever remember the words because I'm not a scientist at all. But these supplements that we give him help to regulate his system so that he can be healthy. And they work. And we wouldn't have had that even 30 years ago. So we know that he was given to us for a reason. And I did pray one time for God to heal him of Down syndrome. And I heard so clearly in my mind, it's a gift. And I was like, well, God, wait a second. I know that Redmond's a gift. And I thank you for him. But what about Down syndrome? And he said it again, it is a gift. And I was like, okay, I do not understand, but I will never ask you to fix it again. That's fine. He has Down syndrome. Will you please heal his breathing issues? Will you please? I mean, and so we continue to pray for his health, and his complete wholeness. But Down syndrome, it was a gift. And it may be a gift we never understand, but we know that we have a beautiful person in our family who is loving and accepting and empathetic. And he may be slow at walking or talking or even like learning his letters or whatever. But what he is extra good at is empathy and like human connection. He sees who needs a hug and he freely gives it.
We need a world of Redmonds.
Yes. And he doesn't care about viruses or germs or anything else. He doesn't care. He is going to give you a hug, whether you think you want one or not. And I have seen the hardest of hearts just melt when he's in the room. And people that I thought, I don't know, I can't even describe it. Like people who move through life and you're almost afraid of them because they're so hard. And then they meet Redmond and they just become little puddles of joy. And I realize that they've been hurt. And that's the reason that they're hard. And they know that Redmond is incapable of hurting them. And so they just open their hearts. And just watching him just move through life. Just this little guy who spreads joy and love wherever he goes. And there's people who make fun of him. There's kids who aren't kind. And that's hard on my mama heart, but I have to remind myself, like, there's kids who aren't kind to my typical kids. There's kids who weren't kind to me and my husband when we were younger. That's life. And I'm not going to let that be the thing that defines who he is.
Kimberly, thank you so much for. I have some questions to get to know you.
Oh,
This was probably the part that you were sitting there thinking, "What's he going to ask me?" I know the story. I can tell. Now I got this stranger wants to ask me personal questions, but they're easy. I promise you.
Let's do it.
Okay, this is more for those that are listening to a podcast for the first time, or at least my podcast, our podcast. These are things. I think they're nice to. Maybe get to know you a little bit more. What's your favorite word? Favorite word in the English language?
Oh, I'm a wordsmith. That's so hard. But the word that pops into my mind is plethora.
Plethora.
There's a plethora of grace in my life.
Okay. Least favorite word?
Mucus.
Is there a reason why on that?
It's just gross.
Yeah.
Even the word sounded kind of gross.
What? I can't disagree with that. What sound or noise do you love?
Oh, my children laughing. It's the best.
Sound or noise that you hate?
People chewing loudly in my ear. Please go away. I do not like that at all.
Good thing I didn't have gum in this. Now, we've mentioned some professions that you've done.
Yes.
Is there a profession other than, I guess, what you have done or that you is your calling? Is there something that you always have liked to attempted?
Yes. I always wanted to be a college professor. I always thought that would be just really fun to teach writing to college kids. And I don't know, I'm substitute teaching now in the elementary school. I'm not sure that I really do want to be a college professor, but...
Well, elementary to college, there is
quite a difference, yes. But I always thought that would be... That's something that's on my list of things to do eventually, someday. You know,
normally I'm going to tweak my last question. I mean, you can answer it that way if you want, or you can answer it by way of the story. How would you like to be remembered, or how would you like your story to be remembered or resonate with people that are hearing it maybe for the first time?
Oh, that's good. I would like to be remembered as someone who encourages other people who are going through hard things, that God can be with you in the middle of hard things. He will help you through them. And just because things are hard doesn't mean that you have to give up or be in despair, that there is peace in the middle of the storm. And maybe that's not consistent peace at every minute of every day. But when I look back at everything that I've been through, I see a ribbon of peace and protection that has covered every bit of it. And there were some hard times where I didn't feel peace. But the overarching theme is that when we put our trust in God, He gets us through these difficult things, and He gives us peace to weather any storm.
Kimberly, thank you for sharing your story with us. Incredible story, miraculous story with us. Thank you so much for being gracious enough to do that. I know it's not the easiest story I know to tell maybe over and over again, but we sure are glad that you chose to say yes to doing this podcast with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I love telling the story because of the good things that I can share about it.
And the name of the book, I want to make sure we got that out there.
I forgot to say that. Looking Up When Life Looks Down.
And if anybody wants to read that whole journey, where is it available?
It is available on Amazon and pretty much every major bookseller. I have it available in paperback, ebook, and an audiobook. So you can listen to it, read it. And if you want a signed copy of it, you can get it off my website. You just go on my website, KimberlyWyse.com, and order it on there. You can tell me in the comments who to write it out to, and I'd be happy to sign it for you and send it out myself.
Thank you very much, and appreciate your time again.
I'm really glad to do it. Thank you.
Kimberly Wyse, blogger, wife. Well, let me say wife, mother first.
Yes.
Yeah, because those are the most important jobs. Wife, mother, blogger, author, and fantastic storyteller. We hope you've enjoyed listening to Kimberly's story, and we thank you so much for spending some time with us here in our 15 Minutes with Andy podcast. Go out and make it a great day, a positive day for you and for someone close to you.